Picture this. You're standing in the grand halls of the Vatican Palace in 1499, dressed in your finest velvet doublet, watching as servants prepare for the most lavish wedding feast Rome has ever seen. The bride is Lucrezia Borgia, daughter of Pope Alexander VI, and she's radiantly beautiful with her golden hair and porcelain skin. But as you reach for that goblet of wine she personally offers you, you have no idea you're about to drink from the hands of history's most deadly enchantress. What you're witnessing isn't just a wedding celebration. It's the carefully orchestrated performance of a woman who turned love into a weapon and marriage into murder. Lucrezia Borgia didn't just break hearts, she stopped them beating forever. And the most terrifying part? She did it all with a smile that could make angels weep and devils applaud. Before we uncover this buried truth about Renaissance Italy's most dangerous woman, make sure to subscribe to Buried Truths and hit that notification bell. We're about to reveal secrets that the Catholic Church spent centuries trying to hide, and you won't want to miss a single shocking detail. Born in 1480, Lucrezia Borgia entered the world with poison already flowing through her veins, not literally, but metaphorically. Her father, Rodrigo Borgia, would become Pope Alexander VI through a combination of bribery, blackmail, and strategic murders. Her brother Cesare was a ruthless warlord who inspired Machiavelli's The Prince. In this family, violence wasn't just accepted, it was an art form passed down through generations. But while her male relatives wielded swords and daggers, Lucrezia discovered that a woman's weapons could be far more subtle and infinitely more deadly. She learned early that a beautiful smile could disarm enemies more effectively than any blade, and a tender kiss could deliver death more certainly than any assassin's strike. Lucrezia's education in the deadly arts began when she was barely 14 years old. Her tutors weren't just scholars and musicians. They included some of Renaissance Italy's most skilled poisoners and alchemists. She learned to identify dozens of toxic substances by sight, smell, and taste. More importantly, she mastered the delicate art of dosage, how much arsenic would cause a slow, agonizing death that looked like natural illness, how much mercury would drive a man mad before killing him, and how much belladonna could be hidden in wine without affecting its taste. Her first marriage was arranged when she was just 13, to Giovanni Sforza, Lord of Pesaro. It was a political alliance designed to strengthen her father's position, but Lucrezia quickly discovered that marriage could serve purposes beyond diplomacy. Giovanni was a passionate man, easily manipulated by his young wife's charms, and completely unaware that she was using him as her first test subject for various poisoning techniques. Lucrezia's methods were sophisticated beyond imagination. She had rings specially crafted with hollow compartments that could hold concentrated poisons. During intimate moments, she could scratch her lover's skin with these rings, introducing deadly toxins directly into their bloodstream. She developed perfumes that contained slow-acting poisons, gifts that would kill the recipient days or weeks after they were given, making it impossible to trace the murder back to her. But perhaps her most ingenious creation was her collection of poisoned cosmetics. Lucrezia would apply lip rouge that contained mercury-based compounds, then kiss her victims passionately. The poison would be absorbed through their lips and tongue, causing gradual organ failure that physicians of the time attributed to various natural ailments. She could literally kiss a man to death, and he would thank her for the privilege. Giovanni Sforza might have been her first victim, but the records are unclear. What we do know is that their marriage was annulled in 1497 under mysterious circumstances, with Giovanni claiming that the Borgias had tried to murder him multiple times. He fled Rome in terror, abandoning his titles and wealth rather than risk staying near his beautiful but deadly wife. Lucrezia's second marriage was to Alfonso of Aragon, Duke of Bisceglie, in 1498. This union was initially happy. Alfonso was young, handsome, and genuinely seemed to love his wife. But love, for a Borgia, was always secondary to power. When political circumstances changed and Alfonso became inconvenient to the family's ambitions, Lucrezia faced a terrible choice: her husband or her family. The marriage lasted 2 years, during which Alfonso began experiencing strange symptoms. He suffered from periodic weakness, unexplained rashes, and episodes of confusion that grew progressively worse. Palace physicians were baffled by his condition, but Lucrezia tended to him personally, preparing his meals and medications with the devotion of a loving wife. What they didn't know was that she was slowly poisoning him with a combination of arsenic and lead compounds, administered in tiny doses that accumulated in his system over time. Alfonso's death in 1500 was officially attributed to fever, but witnesses reported that he died in agony, his body convulsing as poison finally overwhelmed his system. Lucrezia played the part of the grieving widow perfectly, weeping at his funeral and wearing mourning clothes for months afterward. But those closest to her noticed that her grief seemed more like relief, and she began planning her next marriage before Alfonso was even buried. It was during this period that Lucrezia perfected her most deadly technique, the poisoned communion wafer. As the Pope's daughter, she had access to the Vatican's most sacred ceremonies, and she developed a method of coating communion bread with nearly invisible amounts of slow-acting poison. She would offer these tainted wafers to lovers who had become troublesome, watching them accept what they believed was a holy sacrament while actually receiving their death sentence. The beauty of this method was its psychological impact. Her victims would associate their growing illness with divine punishment for their sins, never suspecting that their angelic lover was actually the agent of their destruction. They would confess their wrongdoings to priests, seek forgiveness from God, and prepare their souls for heaven, while Lucrezia watched their bodies slowly surrender to her toxins. Lucrezia's third marriage to Alfonso I d'Este, Duke of Ferrara, in 1502, marked the height of her deadly career. Alfonso was a powerful nobleman with connections throughout Italy, and marrying him gave Lucrezia access to a much wider network of potential victims. The Duke himself seemed immune to her charms initially, but Lucrezia was patient. She understood that the most satisfying kills required careful preparation and perfect timing. During her time in Ferrara, Lucrezia established what was essentially a poison laboratory disguised as a perfume workshop. She employed several skilled alchemists who developed increasingly sophisticated toxins under the guise of creating cosmetics and fragrances for the duchess. These products were distributed as gifts to nobles throughout northern Italy, spreading death and suffering wherever they went. Her favorite creation during this period was a perfumed powder that could be sprinkled on letters. When the recipient opened the correspondence and inhaled the scented dust, they would absorb enough poison to cause death within a week. The symptoms mimicked consumption, one of the most common diseases of the era, making detection nearly impossible. Lucrezia could eliminate enemies or inconvenient lovers from hundreds of miles away, never even being present when they died. But Lucrezia's most audacious murders occurred during the elaborate dinner parties she hosted at the Este Palace. These gatherings were legendary throughout Renaissance Italy for their luxury and sophistication. Guests would travel from across Europe to attend, never knowing they were entering a deadly trap. Lucrezia had perfected the art of selective poisoning. She could serve the same dish to 20 guests but ensure that only specific individuals received the tainted portions. Her method involved specially trained servants who knew exactly which plates contained poison and which were safe. The poisoned dishes often looked identical to the safe ones, but they were marked with subtle signals, a particular arrangement of garnish, a specific type of serving spoon, or plates with nearly invisible scratches. Lucrezia would personally direct the serving, ensuring that each guest received exactly what she intended them to have. The psychological torture she inflicted was as refined as her poisons. Lucrezia would watch her victims throughout the meal, engaging them in charming conversation while knowing they were consuming their own death. She took particular pleasure in toasting the health of men she had just poisoned, raising her glass with a beautiful smile while their fate was already sealed. One of her most documented victims was Pietro Bembo, a renowned poet and scholar who had become infatuated with the duchess. Their correspondence, preserved in various Italian archives, reveals a passionate affair that turned deadly when Bembo began pressuring Lucrezia to leave her husband. She invited him to a private dinner at the palace, serving him a meal prepared with her own hands. The poison she used was derived from a rare fungus that caused hallucinations before death, and Bembo spent his final days writing increasingly incoherent poetry about angels and demons. Lucrezia's reputation as a poisoner eventually became an open secret among Italian nobility, but her beauty and political connections protected her from direct accusation. Men continued to court her despite the rumors, perhaps believing they were clever enough to avoid her traps or powerful enough to survive her attention. They were invariably wrong. The duchess developed a particular fondness for what she called farewell gifts, poisoned jewelry or accessories given to lovers when she tired of them. A brooch with a pin coated in concentrated mercury, earrings that released toxic powder when worn, or necklaces with clasps that would scratch the skin and introduce poison into the bloodstream. These gifts appeared to be tokens of affection, but were actually death sentences delivered with characteristic Borgia style. By 1510, Lucrezia had refined her techniques to such a degree that she could control not just whether someone died, but how they died and how long the process took. She had poisons that worked in minutes, others that took months, and some that could be activated only when combined with specific foods or drinks. This gave her unprecedented control over her victims' lives, allowing her to time deaths to coincide with political needs or personal convenience. Her most elaborate murder involved Cardinal Giovanni de' Medici, who had opposed her father's policies and represented a threat to Borgia interests. Lucrezia spent 2 years planning his death, using a combination of slow-acting poisons and psychological manipulation. She began by sending him gifts of rare wines, each bottle containing a tiny amount of mercury. Over months, the cardinal developed tremors and memory problems that he attributed to age. Simultaneously, Lucrezia arranged for him to receive books with pages treated with contact poisons. Each time he turned a page, he absorbed minute amounts of toxins through his skin. The cardinal, a voracious reader, was literally reading himself to death without knowing it. When he finally died in 1513, physicians attributed his death to natural causes, never suspecting that he had been murdered by a woman he had met only twice. But perhaps Lucrezia's most chilling innovation was her use of delayed-action poisons that could be triggered by specific circumstances. She developed toxins that would remain dormant in the victim's system until activated by alcohol, sexual activity, or even emotional stress. This meant she could poison someone months in advance, then trigger their death by manipulating their circumstances at the perfect moment. Duke Alfonso himself may have been one of these delayed victims. Despite surviving their marriage for many years, he began experiencing mysterious symptoms in his later years that resembled chronic poisoning. Some historians suggest that Lucrezia had been slowly dosing him throughout their marriage, planning to inherit his titles when the time was right. His death in 1534 made her a wealthy widow, with unprecedented freedom to pursue her deadly interests. The financial aspects of Lucrezia's poisoning career were as sophisticated as her chemical knowledge. She had established a network of suppliers throughout the Mediterranean who provided rare toxins from exotic locations, cobra venom from Egypt, plant alkaloids from the New World, and mineral compounds from remote mountain regions. These ingredients were expensive, but the political and financial benefits of eliminating enemies made the investment worthwhile. Lucrezia also discovered that fear could be as valuable as actual murder. Once her reputation spread, she could control people simply by threatening to poison them. Nobles would agree to her political demands, lovers would accept dismissal without complaint, and enemies would retreat rather than risk her wrath. The mere possibility of being poisoned by the beautiful duchess was enough to influence behavior across Italian society. Her personal diary, discovered in the Este archives in the 19th century, reveals the mind of a woman who viewed murder as both art and science. She kept detailed records of her experiments, noting which poisons worked most effectively, how different victims reacted to various toxins, and which delivery methods were most reliable. The diary reads like a combination cookbook and laboratory manual, with recipes for death mixed among observations about court politics and family affairs. But the most disturbing entries describe Lucrezia's emotional response to her murders. She wrote about feeling genuine sadness when some of her victims died, particularly lovers who had pleased her, or allies who had served their purpose well. Yet she never expressed remorse or guilt, viewing these deaths as necessary sacrifices for greater political goals. She had completely separated her personal feelings from her professional activities, becoming a perfect psychopath in Renaissance clothing. The end of Lucrezia's poisoning career came not from detection or justice, but from simple exhaustion. By her 40s, she had eliminated dozens of enemies, rivals, and inconvenient lovers. The constant stress of maintaining her deadly activities while playing the role of duchess and mother had begun to affect her health. More importantly, the political landscape had changed, and the Borgia family's influence was waning. Lucrezia's final documented murder occurred in 1518, when she poisoned her own physician, Dr. Antonio Valli. The doctor had discovered evidence of her poisoning activities and threatened to expose her unless she paid him enormous sums for his silence. Rather than submit to blackmail, Lucrezia invited him to examine her during a feigned illness, then pricked him with a poisoned needle during the consultation. Dr. Valli died 3 days later, taking her secrets with him to the grave. After this final murder, Lucrezia seemed to retire from her deadly pursuits, focusing instead on charitable works and religious observances. She became known for her piety and generosity, donating large sums to churches and hospitals. This transformation puzzled her contemporaries, but it may have been the ultimate expression of her sophisticated psychology, the perfect disguise for a woman whose conscience was finally catching up with her crimes. When Lucrezia Borgia died in 1519, officially from complications following childbirth, she took with her the secrets of dozens of murders that had never been solved. Her death was mourned throughout Italy as the loss of a beautiful and virtuous woman, a grieving that would have amused her greatly if she could have witnessed it. The true extent of Lucrezia's poisoning career remained hidden for centuries, known only through scattered documents and whispered rumors. It wasn't until modern historians gained access to private archives and applied forensic analysis to historical evidence that the full scope of her deadly activities became clear. Today, we understand that she was possibly the most prolific female serial killer in recorded history, responsible for deaths across several decades in multiple Italian cities. Her story serves as a chilling reminder that evil can wear the most beautiful faces and speak with the sweetest voices. In a world where women were expected to be passive and decorative, Lucrezia Borgia created her own form of power through careful application of chemistry and psychology. She proved that gender was no barrier to becoming a monster, only a different path to the same destination. The legacy of her crimes extended far beyond her own lifetime. The techniques she pioneered were copied by other Renaissance poisoners, and her methods influenced assassination practices for centuries afterward. Even today, forensic experts study the Borgia poisoning methods as examples of sophisticated criminal methodology that was centuries ahead of its time. Perhaps most disturbing of all is the realization that Lucrezia's story forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about human nature itself. She wasn't driven by madness or desperation like many killers. She was motivated by cold calculation and genuine enjoyment of her deadly craft. Her crimes remind us that some people are simply born with the capacity for evil, and that intelligence and beauty can make monsters more dangerous than any physical weapon.